Brought to you by Audible. As you know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with over 100,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again, audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 30-day trial membership. There is no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book download. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I am not going to recommend anything. I'm just going to note again that there are over 100,000 titles to choose from. So go browse the catalog, find something you like, download it, and listen to it. Audible is a good service with a great selection, and I would encourage you all to take advantage of it. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the final episode of The History of Rome, episode 179, The End. About 5 years ago, I got it into my head to start a podcast. After hearing 12 Byzantine rulers and loving it, I tried to find a podcast on Roman history, because surely there must be one, but I came up empty. I was in the middle of reading The War with Hannibal by Livy, and thought that, man, there is a lot of really cool stories buried in here that never see the light of day, because my god, this reading is so dry. So I started to think that maybe I should start a podcast about Roman history. I went and snagged my copy of the Early History of Rome by Livy and used it to outline the first dozen or so episodes, the 7 kings, the 12 tables, the sack of Rome. Then I Googled how to podcast. Then I fought bitterly with technology for about a week. Then I got it all straightened out. And on July 27th, 2007, I published the first episode of the... Then I settled into a nice routine of publishing every Sunday night. We went through the early quasi-mythical period of half-remembered legend because Brennus and the Gauls burned Rome to the ground in 390 BC. We went from the kings through the establishment of the Republic, the conflict of the orders, Roman expansion out into Italy, wars with the Etruscans and Latins and the Samnites, and history started to become less mythical and more concrete. Finally, we got into the bits that I really wanted to get into from the beginning, the Punic Wars, Hannibal, Scipio, the great struggle that left Rome the strongest power in the Mediterranean world. Then we started running into problems with hosting, because amazingly, too many people were listening to the show, and it was crashing archive.org. Then we ran into problems with episode limits on the blogging service I was using, but we kept going and made it into the 100s BC and the conquest of Greece, the civil unrest let loose by the Gracchi brothers, the rise of Marius, and the rise of Sulla. Then, for those of you who have been around that long, you'll remember that the show went on hiatus for 7 months because I completely burned out. For those of you who discovered the show later, just know that the whole thing almost died at episode 33, Marius and Sulla. But it only almost died. I bought a new laptop and decided that I would hate myself forever if I didn't finish the job. I had planned to do about 75 episodes, and I was all ready to the breakdown of the Republic, so I didn't want to be the guy who swam 2/3 of the English Channel, got tired, and swam back. So then we went through the civil wars of Marius and Sulla, the rise of Crassus and Pompey, and then finally to the rise of Julius Caesar. It was at about episode 40 that I realized I was in big trouble. An entire episode was dedicated to a single year. But there was too much information, too much that we needed to understand, so progress ground to a complete halt. The fall of the Republic set the pace for the whole rest of the series. It took about 50 episodes to cover the 700 years from 753 to 60 BC, and it would take 140 more episodes to cover the remaining 500 years. But I didn't care. I was blissing out and loving every minute that I got to spend toiling away on my never-ending project. When the Julio-Claudian dynasty fell, I got married, and we moved from Portland, Oregon to Austin, Texas. With the new headquarters established, we plowed through the Flavians and the Antonines and started running into bad trouble like the Marcomanni Wars and Commodus. Then the Severans came along. Everything became a lot more militant and a lot more sinister. And then in the middle of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire really should have ended. And in many ways it did. That crisis period has since become one of my favorite periods in Roman history, mostly because no one ever talks about it. No one ever goes into detail about it. It's always, well, the Severan dynasty fell apart, and things were really super crazy for 50 years. Okay, on to Diocletian and Constantine. But the crisis of the 3rd century is fascinating. It is utterly fascinating. It took us 16 episodes to get through that 50-year period alone. I think it was totally worth it. When we emerged from the crisis years, it was on to Diocletian and the Tetrarchy, and then the rise of Constantine and Christianity. Constantinople was founded while I was in Italy, enjoying the first of 3 Roman history tours, which was just an awesome, awesome time. historyofrometour.com. Yes, even though the show is ending, we want to keep doing them, but I will get to that. When I got back, we rolled into the breakdown of the Constantinian dynasty, Julian the Apostate, then on to Valentinian and Valens. Then we found out that Mrs. History of Rome was pregnant. Then it was on to the Battle of Adrianople and the rise of Theodosius. Things started to get really bad now. The barbarians were coming, but they were not going away. The empire split into east and west, but not really. The legions became almost entirely mercenary. Germanic generals were pulling the strings, but that wasn't a bad thing at all because the emperors were just terrible buffoons at this point. Stilicho gave way to Aetius just as I went back to school, because yes, I've been attending UT for the last 4 months and still putting out the show every week because I have no life. Then Gaul was overrun, and Spain was overrun, and North Africa was seized by the Vandals. Attila the Hun arrived just as I was heading off for the 4th History of Rome tour, which was another awesome, awesome time. Aetius gave way to Ricimer, the West began circling the drain, the final Shadow Emperors came and went, Romulus Augustulus was crowned, and then he was exiled. Our baby boy is due any day now. I am ready. Mrs. the History of Rome, I can promise you, is really ready. And so, the history of Rome is over. 5 years of work, 675,000 words, 189 episodes, 74 hours of content. Good Lord, what a hell of a damn thing. Since we are at the end, it is worth taking a moment to wonder why this is the end. I mean, of the Roman Empire, not of the podcast. Now, as I already discussed, there are lots of arbitrary lines in the sand we can draw to say, before this Rome, after this, no more Rome. And I'm stopping at 476 out of a vague sense of historical convention. I don't really want to get into the debate about the superiority of this arbitrary line versus that arbitrary line, especially since one of the strongest arguments out there is that no one should talk about the fall of the Roman Empire until the Turks start blasting a hole in the side of the Theodosian walls in 1453, and that is just too far in the future for me to deal with. And besides, by that time, the descendants of Rome ruled a Greek-speaking, Orthodox Christian-believing empire, which is, really, a wholly different cultural construction than the Latin-speaking pagans we began our journey with. Something had broken down. Is the political, economic, and cultural makeup of Italy, for example, different in 800 AD than it was during the age of the Antonines? Clearly, yes. Was that makeup different in 600 than it was during the age of Constantine? I would say they were getting closer, but still, yes. What about 500 and 400? Well, much less so, but a few important things had changed. Strong emperors had been replaced by puppet emperors who had been replaced by no emperors. Tight borders had given way to porous borders, had given way to no borders. So something pretty important happened in the 5th and 6th centuries. And though it was a gradual transition, that does not mean we can't still talk about the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire fell at some point. That much, at least, I think we can all agree on. So the question is, why did Rome fall when it did? Or more precisely, why did the western half of the empire fall? Well, I have joked that there are 256 different reasons why the Western Empire fell, and though I am obviously exaggerating, it is not that much of an exaggeration. The decline and fall of something as monumentally complex as the Roman Empire is not going to be able to be explained away by one or two simple causes. Now, everyone has a pet theory, something they want to highlight over everything else, and Lord knows I've got my own suspicions. But the basic fact is that all of these theories are likely correct to some degree, and each played off each other in a synergistic orgy of destruction. In his nice little summation, The Fall of the Roman Empire, for example, Michael Grant offers 14 interacting tensions that led to the fall of the West. And just to give you a sense of the scope and flavor of what we're talking about, here they are. The generals against the state, the people against the army, the poor against the state, the rich against the state, the middle class against the state, the people against the bureaucrats, the people against the emperor, ally against ally, race against race, dropouts against society, the state against free belief, complacency against self-help, the other world against this world. Now, I tend to break all of this down into 6 broad categories, which I'd like to run through briefly with you now. Political factors, economic factors, military factors, social factors, religious factors, and environmental factors. Though we are not going to land on a definitive answer for why the Western Empire fell, it will still be fun to walk through each of these to give you an idea of what Rome was really up against in the late 400s. First, there are the political factors. By 476 AD, the governing apparatus of the Western Empire had become a brittle farce. The centralized regimentation introduced by Diocletian, which had perhaps given the empire a new lease on life during the 300s, was now killing it. The quality of the emperors, as you may have noticed, declined precipitously after the death of Theodosius. So the very center of this strict regimentation had become rotten. The emperors had all the theoretical power in the world, but that power was being wielded by cloistered fools, totally disconnected from the empire they allegedly ran. Plus, given that the communication networks of the day were falling apart along with everything else, even a great emperor couldn't hope to achieve what his propaganda and his edicts promised that he could. Local autonomy had thus become simultaneously dead and more important than ever, a contradictory circle that had become more difficult to square with each passing day. The bureaucracy was hopelessly corrupt. The best educated declined to enter state service because it was rightly viewed as a corrupt and dangerous occupation. The political apparatus, in other words, was broke and getting